going to go ahead and jump in. And last week we talked about Joseph and how he adopted Jesus as a son, how God spoke to him and Joseph just kind of woke up and did what God said. Today we're going to take another step in our Advent journey in our Christmas Is series. And this story that we're going to look at today, sometimes when people read it, they say, this story's in the Christmas story, but it doesn't really seem to fit, but it does fit. It's the story of the birth of John the Baptist. And a lot of times this is actually the story that we start with Advent. This year we're kind of doing it in a different order, but I really hope that we'll lean into the story today of John the Baptist. And what I think you're going to find is this story actually really does fit in the Christmas season. And what I wanted to do today is really just read the story, if that's okay. We're kind of here. It feels like family today. We're all in the round, and it's awesome. So what I want to do is I just want to read the story. It's kind of a long story. It's not 30 minutes long, but it is a little bit more scripture than we normally read in one sitting. So I just want to go ahead and let you know and invite you to just lean in. Lean into this story of John the Baptist and hear what God says in His Word. This is Luke chapter 1, starting with verse 5. It says, in the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. So Abijah is a guy from the Old Testament. Zechariah, Elizabeth. Bring those to the forefront of your mind. Those are the main characters of the story today. So there's a guy named Zechariah. He's a priest. His wife is a daughter of Aaron. Her name's Elizabeth. It says this in verse 6, and they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. But they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren, and both were advanced in years. I love the way Luke puts that. Such a great writer to say that they were advanced in years. So he goes on, he says, now while he was serving as priest before God, when his division was on duty, according to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And the whole multitude of the people were praying outside at that hour of incense. And there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John. Now you can imagine that this guy Zechariah, he's a priest, and so he's in the division of the priesthood, and his wife is barren for years, and they're advanced in age, as Luke so elegantly put it. And he's been praying for a baby. Zechariah's been praying that his wife, Elizabeth, would have a son. And so the angel shows up and says, don't be afraid. Your prayer has been heard. And your wife, Elizabeth, will bear you a son. And you shall call his name John. And you will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great before the Lord. And he must not drink wine or strong drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God. And he will go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready for the Lord a people prepared. And Zechariah said to the angel, how shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years. Man, Zechariah, wisdom, right there. He says, I'm an old man, my wife, she's advanced in years. Like, they're just very serious about this in the book of Luke. Zechariah has no problem admitting, I'm an old man, but he says, no, my wife, she's advanced in years. He's asking the question, how can this be? We're both past the childbearing age. And the angel answered him, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I was sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. And behold, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time. And the people were waiting for Zechariah, and they were wondering at his delay in the temple. And when he came out, he was unable to speak to them, and they realized that he had seen a vision in the temple, and he kept making signs to them and remained mute. And when his time of service was ended, he went to his home. After these days, his wife Elizabeth conceived, and for 5 months she kept herself hidden, saying, "Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked on me, to take away my reproach among people." Now fast forward about 9 months is what I would imagine. It says, "Now the time came for Elizabeth to give birth, and she bore a son. And her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown great mercy to her, and they rejoiced with her. And on the 8th day they came to circumcise the child, and they would have called him Zechariah after his father. But his mother answered, 'No, he shall be called John.' And they said to her, 'None of your relatives is called by this name.' And they made signs to his father, inquiring what he wanted to be called. And he asked for a writing tablet and wrote, 'His name is John.' And they all wondered. And immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue loosed, and he spoke, blessing God. And fear came on all their neighbors. And all these things were talked about through all the hill country of Judea. And all who heard them laid them up in their hearts, saying, 'What then will this child be?' For the hand of the Lord was with him." Now there are some wonderful things in this story. I mean, Christmas is wonderful, right?
Amen.
Yeah, amen. Thank you. There are some great things in this story, and I don't want us to breeze past them. I don't want us to blow past them thinking, well, I've heard the story, because I think sometimes we do that, during the Christmas season. If you're a regular churchgoer, every year it's basically the same passages. Like every year it's the same stories. And so I think sometimes in the hustle and the bustle, sometimes in the well, let's make sure we go to church and check that box off for this week. Sometimes it feels that way. I feel that way sometimes. I think that there's a temptation to just blow past it and overlook some of the wonderful things that we see written here. And I don't want to do that today. So I just wanted to pull out a few takeaways from this story that are really wonderful and great. And the first one is this, that Zechariah is chosen. If you don't know about this time period, there's a priesthood, and they're broken up into divisions. And so their division would be called maybe once a year. Maybe for a month or 2 months at a time. And they would come and they would serve the temple of the Lord. Their whole division, their whole family would come and they would serve the temple of the Lord. And then after their time of service, they'd go back home to wherever they lived until the next year when their division was called back. And so for Zechariah to be chosen, this is like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him. This is like his division's chosen, and they cast lots, and by lot it fell to Zechariah. And so he's got this opportunity to serve the Lord in this way. And so he goes into the temple and he's burning this incense. And while he's doing that, the rest of the division, all the people, they're outside, they're praying and praising, they're worshiping and doing all the other things that they did in this time period. And Zechariah is chosen. And so he comes in to the temple, and what happens? An angel of the Lord speaks. And if you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if you start in the New Testament and that's really what you're familiar with, then it kind of seems like, well, angels of the Lord, they kind of speak all the time. If you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, then it just kind of seems that angels are present and then Jesus is on the scene. So it just seems like the people are always with God. But let me tell you, nothing like this has happened in 400 years. Silence. In the Old Testament, you had the prophets and the judges and the kings and all these other people that were hearing from God, but there hit a stop where it seemed like God is non-existent. It seemed like God is not moving. It seemed like God is not doing anything. It seemed like the people were forgotten. It seemed like he was not there among them, and so there was nothing but silence for 400 years. Zechariah is chosen, and he comes into the temple to do the routine, the things that they were always doing day after day, year after year. That's what they were doing, but they were getting nothing but silence. So Zechariah comes into the temple, and an angel appears for the first time. And this symbolizes that God is still moving, and God is moving again. The next thing we see is that this angel talks to Zechariah and says, listen, your wife Elizabeth is going to conceive a son, and that's a miracle. She's well beyond the childbearing years. She's lived in this place of reproach from the people. The people would look at her and say, something is wrong with you, or something is sinful inside of you because you can't bear a child. And so she's having all of these things, and God's not spoken, but she's in this place. And so the angel speaks to Zechariah and says, look, your prayers that you've been praying for so long, they're going to be answered. And this is going to be a great miracle in and of itself. But then he goes further and he talks about the type of person that John would be. He talks about what John is going to do. He says that John's going to turn the hearts of the people to God. I've got 3 boys. Levi's the youngest, and he is just starting to crawl. Isaac's the oldest, and he's 3, so you can kind of do the math and see where we're at in our life at home. When I'm away, the boys tend to get a little bit more rambunctious and rowdy. The Lord hadn't spoken in 400 years. Imagine what's going on with the people. When I come home, the boys are quick to get back in line. It's not that Becca's not disciplined. She's very disciplined with them, but there's just something different about the voice of a father. I don't know if it's because my voice gets louder than Becca's, or if my voice is deeper than Becca, or if I'm taller and look a little bigger. I don't know what it is, but there's just something about these boys when they know their father comes home, a little bit of behavior needs to change. Yeah, that's probably what it is. And so God had not spoken for 400 years. And so the people, they're not following after God as they should. And so the angel says to John, John's going to turn the hearts of the people back to God. He says that he's going to turn the hearts of the fathers to their children. You see, God set it up in the Old Testament that the fathers would follow the ways of God and the commands of God, and that the fathers would teach the children. And if the fathers are not pursuing God, then how are they going to teach the children the ways of God? The whole thing was messed up. That's what was going on. That's the time period that Zechariah was living in, that John was stepping into. And the angel of the Lord said that John's going to come. He's going to turn the hearts of the people back to God, the hearts of the fathers back to the children. He's going to turn the disobedient back to the wisdom of the just. Meaning some things were about to change. And all of this was going to take place because John was going to make a people ready for the Lord. John was going to be used in a mighty way. And so then the angel gives these things. He can't drink wine and fermented drink and all these other things. He's going to be filled with the Spirit from the time that he's born. So the angel talks to Zechariah and says all these things. And Zechariah says, I don't see how. I don't see how God could ever do that in my life. And maybe you've come in this morning saying, I'll go to church again, but I just don't see how God could ever do something wonderful in my life. And so the angel says, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you a sign. You're not going to be able to speak until all these things are taking place. We read it as that he was just mute and couldn't talk, but really when you read the whole story like we just did, it's not just that he's mute, he's probably also deaf. If he weren't deaf, there would be no need for them, the people, to make signs to him. They could just say, hey, what do you want to name him? And then he could make the signs back. He's probably mute and deaf. Can you imagine living that way? Even just for 9 months. This is the sign. What a great sign, right? I'll pass on that kind of sign. That's the sign that the angel gives. And so then they finish up the priestly duties for their division. The time ended. They went back home. And then Elizabeth conceives. If the angel said this is what's going to take place, that your wife Elizabeth is going to have a baby, it's pretty important that she conceives. Because that's kind of the next step in the process. And Elizabeth, what does she do? Instead of parading it around, because I just feel like if it were me, I'd be like, oh yeah, all of y'all who said all these things about me, I'm pregnant. I thought, I would probably be a little bit more proud. But that would be a miracle. But she hides herself away. I don't know what was just said. I'm going to blow past it. She hides herself away and says, the Lord has done this. He's taken away my reproach. It's truly a miracle. Go a little bit further into the story. The child is born. God spoke through an angel, and it came to be. It's wonderful. And the people, they're marveling, they're wondering, they're in awe. What is going on here again? And to just take it one step further, they're in awe, they're wondering because Elizabeth chooses John and Zechariah chooses John, and there's a perception that they probably haven't talked about this, but they chose the same name. And the people are like, this is getting weird. What's going on? And they literally ask the question, what will this child be? And then Luke records this phrase. It says, for the Lord's hand was with him. There's nothing special about John. And you say, wait a minute, what? All of these things that he did. He went before the Lord and he did all of these things and he did these miracles and signs. And how can you say that there's nothing special about John? There's nothing special about anybody in the Bible outside of Jesus, except the fact that the Lord's hand is with them. You read in the Old Testament Moses and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David and Elijah and Elisha and all these prophets and all these kings and all these people and all these judges and all these things that happen. There's nothing special about them. It's just the fact that the Lord is with them. And that's what it is about John that makes him special. The Lord was with him. But all of this was pointing towards something even greater. Now, we're on a journey in Advent. We're in a journey towards the birth of Christ. And so for this week, I want us to put pause on the journey and step out of the journey. Because everything in this story that we're looking and talking about today is looking ahead to a time when Jesus would come. And that is wonderful. It's more wonderful than the story that we just read because this story is pointing ahead towards it. We live on the other side of history. We live on the other side of the cross. So all these people, they're looking ahead to the cross. We stand on the other side of history and we look back on the cross. And so I want us to just pause our Advent journey, this series, and step out of the journey and think that Jesus has come. Well, Chris, what is that like? What's that do for us? Why is that so special? This is why it's special. In these days, these people were accustomed to one person having the Spirit of God on them. Whether it be a king or a prophet or a judge in the Old Testament, they're used to one person having the Spirit of God. And having to go and find this person to hear a word from God, or go and seek this person's counsel to hear what God would have them do. That's what they're used to, is running to this one person. But now that Christ has come, for those who believe in him, the Lord's hand is with us all. That's what made John special, and that's what can set us apart as God's people. Not that we're better than non-believers, because I can be totally honest with you, I'm not. There's nothing in me that is good. There's nothing in me that is righteous. There's nothing in me that would choose God, but the Lord's hand. For those who believe in God, the Lord's hand is with us. And that's what makes us set apart. Do you believe? Do you believe? If you believe, then the Lord's hand is with you. And I wonder what God might do through you this season. John had all these things foretold about and prophesied about and said all these things are going to happen, and it all happened because the hand of the Lord was with him. And if you believe, I wonder what God would have for you in this season. I'm not talking about just, one thing in your life. No, I'm talking about what in the next few weeks could God have for you to do. Christmas makes this possible. God coming. That's what Christmas represents. God coming to earth. God putting on flesh and dwelling among us. I wonder what God would have to do in you this season. And it's all because of Christmas. Christmas is wonderful. God coming is wonderful. And I just wonder if we could embrace this. I wonder if we could embrace the wonder. And I'm going to stay kind of up here for just a few moments, and then in a little while we'll try to bring the ladder down to something a little bit more tangible and a little bit more practical. And maybe you can relate with Elizabeth, and maybe you feel like you've been in a season of silence and barrenness and brokenness and reproach, and you just feel like, I don't know if I can embrace the wonder that God has come and his hand could be on me. I don't know if I can embrace that, but could we try today? I feel like in the season and the hustle and the bustle and all the things that we have to do, all the meetings, all the parties, all the gifts to buy, all the things to go, I wonder if we just get so busy that we forget to pause and reflect and remember that the Lord's hand is with us. Could we pause for just a moment and think about this? Could we embrace the wonder today? So when forced to reflect on your life and whatever you're going through, you might find yourself coming to the question, how? If the question earlier was, I wonder what God might do in us this season, the way we respond to that, depending on what's going on in your life, might be, how could God do something wonderful in me? Why would God choose me to do something wonderful on earth? Chris, you don't know about my life. It's just so mundane. This is great for the people in the story, but my life is just kind of average and day to day, it's a routine that if I'm honest, I'm kind of tired of. How could God do something wonderful in me? Or maybe you would go further than that. And you would say, Chris, you don't know the anxiety that I'm dealing with. You don't know the pressure that I'm dealing with. You don't know the stress that I'm dealing with. Chris, if I were to classify my life to you today, it would not be wonderful. I would say that it is literally like hell on earth, and just getting here today was work for me. So Chris, if you're telling me to roll up my sleeves and try harder, you just don't get it. I've been there. I've been in the deep, dark places of barrenness. Not necessarily physically speaking, but I've been in these moments in my life where I'm like, God, are you even there? And when I was preparing preparing for today, praying for today, I really felt like God wanted me to come and say these 4 short words to you. 3 short words. God sees you. God sees you. No matter what you're dealing with, no matter what you're going through, no matter how light or heavy it may be, I want you to know, like he saw Zechariah and Elizabeth and heard their prayers for years, I believe that God wanted you to hear me tell you today that God sees you. It's not about rolling up your sleeves and trying harder to be better. How could the wonder come alive in us? The gospel awakens the wonder in us. God, who was in heaven, put on flesh, came and dwelt among us in the form of Jesus Christ. He was born of a virgin. He lived a perfect and sinless life, and he took our place in death on a cross so that we could take his place in life. You can live. You can live a life of joy and peace in the midst of chaos and in the midst of tragedy and in the midst of barrenness and brokenness. How, Chris, how can we do this? This is why the Lord is with us. God is with us now. And it's the gospel that awakens this wonder in us. We don't have to walk through this life alone trying to make it. We don't have to walk through this life trying to be good enough if we just confess and believe. Then God is with us now. And your situations may not change, but the hand of the Lord will be with you. And you can walk forward today back into that circumstance. What's amazing is that when the angel spoke to Zechariah, it didn't happen like that. There was a process. And they had to go back to that job, back to that place, back to that routine, back to that mundane way of living. But the Lord was with them every step of the way. And because Jesus has come, because we stand on the other side of history, we know and believe that God is with us now. So how do we embrace the wonder? Because this feels good, like in a service like this with low lights and nice music and a good atmosphere. It feels good, but when we leave, what are we supposed to do with it when we leave? How do we walk away embracing the wonder that God is with us? How do we walk back into that routine or back into that hell on earth and embrace that God is with us now? How do we do that? We pause, which we've already done, and we reflect on the gospel. So a tangible way that we do that here at the chapel is we take communion. When we take the bread and the juice, it's the body and the blood of Christ, and we are saying, God, we remember. And this is a tangible expression that you are with me now. And so we reflect. And we remember what God has done for us. And when we go in worship. And sometimes our worship looks like this. God, you're good, and I believe it. Will you show me again? In that deep, dark place of brokenness and barrenness, we say, God, I'm going to try to lift my eyes to you and remember that you've come and you are with me. So God, I believe, but would you help my unbelief? Would you show me again? Would you help me again to embrace the wonder of Christmas? Because Christmas is wonderful. It's not about ornaments and trees and lights and snowmen and jolly men in red suits. It's that God is with us